Yeah, can you hear me? Yeah, nice, good. Okay, so I think we should start because it's exactly 3 p.m. So it's always worth to appreciate anyone who was on time. So welcome at my talk, Enums on steroids. And the title may be a little bit cryptic, but during this talk I hope that you will be able to solve this mystery as we will go throughout it. And just not to waste the time, let's start with some small intro. So, you can imagine yourself sometimes in this place where this sad guy is sitting. And you know, usually we as Java devs, we are sometimes very, very jealous about people who are working with Kotlin because we are envying them these new features of the language and how does it look like, and we are a little bit envy about it. So does the situations look bad? In my opinion, it could even look much more worse because, to be honest, we are usually looking not only for Kotlin devs, but also for every other language. So we are looking at these languages features and say, okay, nice, we have some new syntax constructs there and something more. And you know, and what is Java? Java becomes a little bit obsolete, and we are started to being worrying about it because we are working with the obsolete language. Okay, maybe it also thinks that we became more and more irrelevant, and we are start to being worried about what would be our future, because if we are becoming irrelevant, it seems that okay, maybe our incomes in the nearest futures also will become irrelevant, and we wouldn't be able to afford ourselves for these installments of mortgage. Not to be worried about, I try to convince you that this situation is not so black as it is painted, and I would like to invite you for some journey of the features of the modern versions of Java language, and let's start the journey. My name is Marcin Chrost. I am a web developer with about 20 years of experience and also a consultant and IT trainer. And I would like you to let's start our journey with the modern Java language. Okay, if we want to visually show some examples, we need something like business case, because every good talk comes with a business case, and the example we can somehow show you the features of the language or something like that. So let's start from something like we would like to present, and it's loan engine. Okay, seems a little bit guessing. So okay, what is loan engine? Let's assume that we would like to earn some money, and we decide that, okay, the most easiest way to earn some money is to just multiply the one we have already. So we will just try to lend the money from some people, and just by getting these rates and the installments, we will get this what we would like to earn. So definitely we plan to be this shark, and our customer has a bad luck to be exactly here. Okay, seems pretty reasonable. There isn't any other way around to something would go wrong. Of course, with some small exceptions, because in a very worst case, we can finish like this unfortunate pair. If someone was looking at this franchise, definitely it's the one of my favorite traps, this pound of flesh in the Soul part 6. And usually, why I'm mentioning it? Because it was unfortunately constructed for two money lenders who were giving their loans for people who weren't able to repay it. And of course, John Kramer decided gave him a hard lesson. But okay, let's not deep dive into these very bloody details. Let's focus on something much more pleasant. Let's go to the diagram. How does it look like? Okay, Assume that we are just trying to perform some systems for arranging the lending of money. So the business scenario is like that the customer goes to some booth or some stand in even a shopping mall, and he or she says, okay, I would like to borrow some money. Okay, and the request of borrowing some money includes just two input values: the amount I would like to borrow and the period for which the period I would like to borrow the money. Seems pretty straightforward, doesn't it? Okay. And now the most interesting part jumps into action, because we need to decide whether we would really like to lend her or him the money, because you know, in all this business, everything is only working assuming the fact that the person who we have borrowed the money is able to repay it. If no, sorry, it's our loss. And if we will decide it for many times incorrectly, we all lose our money, and our journey to the big money will just end at the beginning of the story. So you need to deliberately select whether we are able to repay, to lend it or not. So we are trying to put all these things into something like evaluator. And the evaluator carefully and deliberately evaluates these two things and decides one of the three possible outcomes. The first one, okay, we approve, we give the person the money. However, also with a small exception, it's possible that in some cases we would borrow less money than the person has requested. And this is the amount output parameter exactly plays its role in this case. The second one is we just refuse to lend the money because we are pretty sure that this unfortunate guy wouldn't be able to repay it at all. But, you know, in 21st century, we cannot just say impolitely that, sorry, get out, you will not get the money, and goodbye. But we need to at least try to explain ourselves why it isn't possible. So definitely we need to present the reason to her or him. And the third outcome is the situations when we tentatively decide to probably lend the money, but after this evaluation, we say, okay, but we need some additional requirements to be fulfilled, and this is the additional requirements output parameter, and also we mention a deadline until the person should really be able to present this requirement. Okay, that's fine, that's okay. We are now more or less ready to try to start to model this system. And the first very unpleasant discovery is here that we have three possible outcomes. Haven't we? So, unfortunately, simple Boolean does not work here. Unfortunately, we have three-state logic. So we need to somehow model it in a little bit different way. Okay, if it's not possible to model it by the simple Boolean, we definitely we need something. Unfortunately, or fortunately, depends on the context how we look at like that we need to model it via objects hierarchy, and we need to try to perform some abstraction which represents the response of the possible outcome from evaluator, and decide how to present it in these three states. Okay. Simply saying, the code would look like as following way. So we are starting for the request class because it represents our model, our income to this process. And in this request class, as it was stated in the diagram, we need two fields, two input values, its amount or period. It's definitely, it's fine, it's completely, we are just for the brevity, we are omitting the rest of the process, that's fine. And we also try to model this as an immutable class, because immutable classes in Java had a lot of advantages. They are thread safe, they are not possible to be created in inconsistent state. So we are trying to model in exactly like way. And on the other hand, we need to model the response. And in such case, the response is being modeled just with the interface, because response as such does not have something in common, except there is the response. So definitely we do not need any field here and so on. And as one of the, we have 3 possible responses. So just for brevity, I only presented the one of these 3. It was the suspension, because it's, in my opinion, the most complicated one. So it is just implementing this interface, and it includes this additional requirements field and the deadline. And as I said 1 minute ago, we would like to model this as immutable classes. So assuming that we are starting the journey from Java 11, just as a survey, who is still working with Java 11 or less? There are still a few people. Nice. Okay. I would also like to ask some other questions, but let me just break it, because in Thessaloniki, in Vox, they also asked who is not working with Java at all, and there were still few hands on the audience. So, but let's keep it for now, because it gives not additional value. So we need to somehow model this immutability, and I decided to use Lombok. Okay, value in Lombok gives you what you exactly need. Everything's fine. You have this constructor for all arguments, all these getters, all the fields are final, and so on. That's nice. Except one thing. If you are using Lombok, you tie yourself up to Lombok as such. So if you try to migrate to the newest JDK version, you are no longer you cannot longer do it until the Lombok is being released. And this was a trap I fall into, because when I was experimenting with JDK 21 virtual threads about 1 year ago, I was very happy that this version of the JDK has been released. So I just downloaded it, installed, tried to compile my code, run, and boom, does not work, because, sorry, your Lombok version does not work with Java 21. You need until the new version of Lombok is being released. Sorry. It was only 3 days, because Lombok committers work very hard, and to be honest, they are usually not being delayed more than 1 week after the Java JDK release, but still, it somehow painfully reminds you that you are not 100% free, in this case, and independent, so sorry. So definitely, this is the thing we would like to avoid. But this is not the worst part of this code. Because we are talking about evaluator, this class doesn't look very bad, to be honest. Because just for brevity, I added here 2 business rules. The first one is that if you are trying to lend too much money, we just simply refuse to do that. And the second one, if we're trying to lend a little less money, but for a long period, we are requiring additional things to do. In other case, we simply approve the request. However, not to be too lenient for the customer, we just cut this required amount by 20%. So it's just multiplied by 0.8. Sorry. Okay, nice. So up to this point, this code does not look very bad. But this is another question to the audience. Who has studied physics or had the physics in the secondary school? Okay, a lot of people. Who remembers the second rule of thermodynamics? Yeah. And what is mentioned in the second rule of thermodynamics? Yeah. Entropy, exactly. And what is with entropy? Yes. And another thing, if the entropy is that this entropy can only increase, cannot decrease. So, as usual, I can say the computer systems are very similar to this thermodynamics, because usually if something is very nice on the surface, usually all this entropy falls behind the scenes, and this is exactly the same place. always there is a one place of the code when all this entropy, in Polish I call it żużel, falls down into, and you had the loss of this mess and you need to somehow cope with it. What's wrong with this code? There are a few things. We need to somehow decide what kind of response do we really work with. So the first thing is you need to just make some casts and check whether the response is of type approval, refusal, or suspension. Very nice Christmas tree, as I usually call that, this if or else if branches, very ugly. The second thing is that after we were happily check whether the response is, for example, instance of approval, we need to cast it once again, because it would be too obvious to just use it here, because I know that the response is of type approval, but you need to cast it once again, because your CPU is too lazy. You need to somehow force him to do some exercise. So it's just worth it to just give him this one extra cycle to work, just not be lenient for him. Sorry. Okay. Having that said, let's start our journey in the future and try to clean this code a little bit up and say that the modern version of Java, it can be rewritten in a much more cleaner way. So let's go through our steps. And the step one is the most obvious one, because in this step, we are just trying to get rid of this unnecessary CPU cycle. Just say that we can, starting as far as I know from Java 13, we can just cast this instance of this response and immediately use this variable in this instance of. So definitely yes, now it makes more sense. I'm checking whether is this the response instance of approval. If it is, I can use it immediately. So still nice. Looks good, and okay, it may be a little bit, sounds very unpromising in comparison to all of this mess I presented in the previous slides, but every journey starts from the first step, everyone. So let's go one step further. Records. Now, this is something that can cause our code to be definitely much more concise, because we can get rid of this unfortunate Lombok value. With this record, we can just define these immutable classes on the pure Java level, just using this record keyword, except of the class, which defines something which is more or less the class, but with some shortened functionality, but still working. And just by enumerating all of these record parts, you are just defining how does the record look like. Of course, for free you will get this all args constructor, all the getters, and with the getters this is also another thing. We will just mention it in the next slide. And all these methods equals hashcode to string, so everything just for free. Nice in comparison to the Lombok value. Of course, with the records there is, just to be very, I would like to somehow warn you about it. With records, you just aren't getting the immutability as such, because record is immutable only if all of its members are immutable. If even one of these members does not fit this condition, the record is not immutable as such. But let's try not to dive deeply into the site. It's still just more concise than the Lombok value being presented before. Okay, but what's the other difference when we are talking about records? Because if records, the JDK guys decided that there is no longer something like getter in the record. No, it's just the method that is just being returns the member of the record, and it's exactly as the same name of the member. Without the get prefix. This is something that just breaks the compatibility with this plain old Java bean convention, to be honest, being dragged with this recent 20 years, but it's being done on purpose, because it's being said that you are not just getting the member, the record is equal to its members, so it definitely makes more sense to just say that, okay, I'm just taking the part of the record, not trying to get it from the class or something like that. Okay, maybe discussable, questionable, or something like that, but makes no sense. Of course, with this change, there was some initial troubles with all the libraries that were basing on this Java Bean standard, for example, Jackson or something like that, and initially there were some troubles with that. However, this was like something like childhood diseases. After a few months, everything was working fine, and now you can use this record without any problems. And the records are especially shining in the case, for example, when you are using Spring Boot and trying to somehow model the configuration properties, because as a record can being nested one inside each other, it definitely fits very nice to the hierarchical structure. So I can definitely recommend using records in such case, and of course, it makes sense. Okay, let's go further. Pattern matching. In case of pattern matching, we can finally change this if-else ugly construction to using switch, because with pattern matching in switch, we can now label the branch not by the value, but the type of the variable being tested in the switch expression. So definitely we can just say, okay, switch the response, this is the value we are just trying to test, and we are not comparing it to any other value, but we are just testing its type. And if it's approval, there is this branch is being executed. If there is a refusal, another, and so on and so on. So we can just get rid of this if-else if. It's much more clear, because now definitely seems that this switch is somehow being describing this, that the situations can somehow fall apart into three possible scenarios. However, there is still one ugly thing here, because we have this very nice label using in switch. However, this is not a nice one, because this break looks not so nice, to be honest. And also, if we forget accidentally to put it, unfortunately, we can fall in a serious errors, because let's just almost everyone in this room, including me, has fallen into this bug when you just only incidentally executed two branches in the switch expressions because just forgetting to add in the break statement. So it's still better than nothing, but looks that something might still be done better. And there's another thing, is something like arrow labels in switch. With arrow labels, we can now write these branches in switch more concisely, especially in case when we have one-liners to being executed. In case of the multi-liner, in the case of approval, it's still much more readable, because definitely we have something like the opening and close blocks. So definitely this is much more clean to understand when this branch is started and when it's finished. With the one-liners, we can even get rid of this parentheses. So definitely everything can be written in the one line. But with these arrow labels, also another fact comes into a play, which is not so obvious at the first glance. And this thing is something like that, because with arrow labels, all this switch branch, every branch is forming a separate lexical scope. So you are able to add some local variable here, because due to the fact that we no longer need the break statement and there is no possibility to just fall over the next branch in the switch expression, you can be 100% sure that if this branch is being finished, this local variable can be safely deleted, and of course compiler does it for us, so we do not need to bother about it. And with such case, definitely it's even easier to write this piece of code in separate branches, because usually these local variables increase the readability, so it makes much more sense. Okay, looks pretty good, but it doesn't. Why? Because even if we have this switch and we have these separate cases for different response outcomes, there is still this ugly if-else here. Because unfortunately, it appears, which is not so obvious at the first glance, that we have not 3 but 4 possible outcomes of this state, because it's also possible that we finally approved the loan request, but we decided to not give the whole amount of money that the requestor requested for. And in such case, we still need to maintain this if-else inside this switch, which looks maybe not so horrible, but still can be done better. And in such case, there is another construction that came into, yeah? Yes, that's true. However, if there is more than 2 possible outcomes, because, for example, if I, for example, have 3 possible states in this approval, so full amount granted then more 30%, and so on, it's still finally you will get to this more than 2 possible branches, and that's okay. But that's a good point. With this only 2, that's fine. The ternary operator would be enough. But still, you know, you need to either assign the result of the ternary operator to the temporary variable and then using it or something like that. Definitely, let's stick to something much more, in my opinion, concise, which is guarded pattern. And guarded pattern, in my opinion, fits the bill on this business case we have just in the previous slide, because in this case, we can extend this switch to use more than 1 branch for the separate outcomes, even with the same type. And now in this case, you see, we have 2 branches with the approval. The first one is the more narrowed one, because it's just being executed only when the approval amount is exactly the same that has been requested. And in the second case, the amount is granted less than it was requested, so definitely we need the second one. And the nice part of this is the fact that this guarded pattern was like that way, that if it is being fulfilled, the other branch is not being evaluated. So there is no possibility that, for example, you can just fall for these 2 branches at once, because every one solved branch just excludes itself from the further processing. So definitely it's not possible that you will be able to fall both in this and these branches at all. So in my opinion, it's much more concise and readable. And there is also one interesting thing regarding that. It's being somehow connected with the preview features in JDK. We will talk about the preview features a few slides later. But usually, everyone is treating preview features in Java like something that's temporary, but finally will be incorporated without any changes in the future. Which looks promising, but it's not true. Because the first thing is that the preview feature can be possibly incorporated in the final versions. We'll talk about later. And the second one is that even if the feature is finally incorporated, it's not excluded that the syntax in different versions of the preview wouldn't change. And this is exactly the place I would like to talk, because initially, these guarded patterns were being expressed a little bit differently, because in the first version of this feature, it's being there was no when keyword, but there was just the double ampersand operator, like with the double end in Java. And this is the good example of the fact that this can be changed, and you cannot be 100% sure how would this permanent feature look like just looking at the preview one, and you can be a little bit surprised. This is also the reason why the preview features are not being compatible even between the different versions of the JDK. You need to compile it and run it separately when you just bump up the version, even if both of them contains almost the same preview features. They are not being considered equal. Okay, that was a small digression. Let's go one step further. Okay. let's go to something like sealed classes interfaces. You know, I just promised to these sealed classes in the topic of this presentation, so would be a very nice, would be a high time to talk about it a few words. So definitely we can say that in our case, our response can only have 3 possible classes that implement it, which makes a lot of sense because, you know, we assume that the only possible outcomes of the response are approval, refusal, and suspension. And there is no other possibility for anyone to implement it. And to be more, we even don't want to do that, because if we leave it open, there is a possibility that, for example, some junior programmer would after a few months, would try to somehow go on a short way and add the 4th class, which is completely break out the classes system and so on. So we would like to somehow prevent herself or himself for doing such big mistakes. So definitely it's nice to somehow seal the hierarchy, and this is exactly the feature that Java 17 gives us in the sealed classes and interfaces. In such case, we are declaring that this interface is being sealed, so only the explicitly enumerated classes can implement it, and these classes are being enumerated here in the permits clause. So it also appears that we have 3rd clause that is appearing in the Java syntax language when we are talking about classes interfaces, because the first 2 ones are extend and implements, and the permits is the 3rd one. Of course, there are some small exclusions that this clause is not always being mandatory if we are just writing some classes in the same file as the sealed class of interface, but just skip it for just the brevity. So we have these 3 classes here, and there is a possibility that no other would be able to implement this interface. And the question might be, what for is it? What does it give us? Okay, so the question and the answer is being somehow hidden here, because, you know, with the previous version of the switch, I deliberately omitted this default clause because it looked like very ugly. However, if you tried to compile this switch without the sealed modifier, the compiler would complain about it and it would not allow us for that. Why? Because compiler would say, okay, Marcin, okay, you have this response, this is their interface. Okay, you have this 3 possible, even 4 branches. But you know, I cannot be 100% sure if this covers all possible values, because you cannot convince me that no one would be able to implement this interface except all 3 classes. So, you know, you can just try to argue with the compiler, try to convince him or her or something like that, but you know, he's just very, very stiff and does not allow it. So definitely we need to be much more strict about it, and exactly the sealed interface gives us the possibility to get rid of this ugly default branch. And with this set, now it starts to look like more or less enum. Because, you know, we have a value, we have all possible values of this more or less of this type, and we can decide how to do with that. So let's try to make some duel and compare enums with sealed classes. Okay, let's start from something which is the same for both, because both enums and sealed classes are more or less as a closed set of values. With enums, it is much more obvious. With sealed classes, okay, it's a little bit hard to think, but still, you know, you have the class or interface, only given classes or interfaces and subclass it, so definitely it is a closed set of value. Okay, nice. So what's the difference? And the difference is being hidden here, because in enums, you do not have something like polymorphism, because if you have the enum in Java, within the same type of enum, each enum value looks exactly the same, has the same fields, has the same methods, and cannot just differ in its shape. With the sealed classes, the situation is completely different, because as in our case, each of these three classes, this suspension, refusal, and approval, are completely different, have different fields, has different methods. So you can just model your business case much more flexibly, because if you are able to decide, okay, I tested my response and this is approval. Okay, I'm pretty sure that I can only get the amount of it and nothing else. There is no, for example, refusal reason or something like that, or this deadline. So definitely fits much the bill what I would like to model. So definitely the result of the dual, in my opinion, is pretty straightforward, but of course you can argue with that, but in my opinion this very much is very nice. So we can somehow finish here, but there is not the end of the journey, because we are talking about Java 23, so definitely let's somehow add these two additional features that somehow nicely fits into this environment of the Enums and our business case. And the first one is the record deconstruction, because as I stated previously, a record is being considered equal to all of its members. So in such case, you can always treat a record as a one-to-one transformation to all of these members. So in such case, usually you would like to be able to get its members' values immediately when, for example, you are able to test when the response is of type of one of these records. And in such case, for example, if we have the case of approval, we can definitely deconstruct it immediately with the pattern matching and use this amount variable here, because we do not want to get from the record. Also, this works exactly the same way. If the record has more than one field, it even looks better. And the third case, when this feature somehow shines very brightly, is the situations when your records consist some nested records, because in such case you can deconstruct it immediately at the level of the root record. So definitely you are able, for example, to get in this switch to the fields of the nested records inside this case. Unfortunately, in this case, it's very hard to somehow show it, because our records are a little bit flat. But when we are talking about, for example, some configuration properties in Spring, it looks very nice and allows you to get rid of the most of the code usually in this switch, because from my experience, 50% of these lines in these branches would be just getting the fields from the record. So if you can just deconstruct it immediately at the pattern matching, the code is much more cleaner, and in my opinion, give a lot of extra advantages. Okay, so this was more or less Java 21. So last thing I would like to talk about, and this is not the preview feature, and we are going to Java 23, are unnamed patterns and variables, because sometimes we have the case that we just do not want to bother ourselves with, for example, the reason of the refusal, because we would just like to, okay, for the business, for some logging purposes and so on, that's fine, but just for the displaying the message, we just want to only show the customer, okay, your request has been refused. I do not want even to bother about this refusal record as such, so we can just skip this variable in here and just notify the compiler, okay, I don't want to think about this variable, just use this underscore to omit the value. That's fine for me, and I don't want into at all. And also this applies to the situations where we are, for example, making the record deconstruction. Also, we can safely omit one or more of these records members when deconstructing it. And the third case, when this unnamed pattern also somehow plays the very important role, is the situations, for example, you are catching the exception and you are not interested in the exception at all, but you are just only want to log something and do nothing more, something like. And also you can, in such case, you can omit the exception variable, which is not needed for you. Okay, so, okay, tell me maybe one another questions. Okay. When are the string templates, string gatherers, what example Grzegorz was talking a few hours ago about, and it was more interesting, and so, and other preview features in the Java, which looks very sexy. Okay, and this is my response, because usually people think that preview features are always finally incorporated, especially string templates. As probably almost everyone in this room know, that string templates has been finally rejected from Java 23, and they of course need to be rethinked and rethought about and so on. And maybe in the future they will reappear again, but at this time no one knows when it would be. So, sorry. We cannot unfortunately rely on everything what is preview until it's being treated as the permanent feature. Sorry. So this was the reason I wouldn't like to present it in this during this talk, because I don't want to break your hopes, to be honest, because you cannot imagine how does it look like. Okay. As we are just going to the time is somehow going to the end. Some outros. So. Definitely, even not regarding these preview features, it still seems that there are new JDK features are being ahead of us. There are a lot of projects being still developed within even the JDK, Valhalla, Loom, and so on. So definitely we can expect much very interesting new features and possibilities and syntax. So definitely it's always worth to wait for something, because the Java is being developed, even in the opposition to people who are saying that it's completely obsolete and we are just should somehow go into the grave when and lie inside the coffin when we are developing in Java. I'm completely not agree with that. And also it means that we are still relevant as a developers, so we shouldn't be worried about our future, and I think that's a little bit more optimistic for that, especially like that. And finally, why should we learn about the new features, except the fact that, for example, we would like to be on the edge? Because usually because even if you know the new features, learn about it, someone needs to always somehow be able to be a little bit too brave to introduce in our project, and you introducing new features and so on. You are becoming somehow a leader because you decide to be different than the rest of your team and trying to find something new and be able to change. Okay, and that's all. If someone is interested within this code, I can always recommend it by cloning it, because it's always available as a GitHub. So definitely, if you are interested, let's put this slide for a while. Okay, and if everyone has scanned it, I would like to thank you for your attention. If there are any questions, I'm always open for that. Thanks.